So welcome everyone to the Agile HR Community's Fireside Chat, where we are celebrating a 11-year-old journey and experience in trying to figure out what Agile means in the HR and management organizational development setting. So my name is Riina Hellström, and I'm very honored to have Josh Bersin here today with me and have you all here today with me. It's been a long journey, and I'm so thrilled and glad that the modern people-centric, human-centric HR is finally hitting the mainstream. And we, if nothing else, this year has pushed us into understanding that we can't continue anymore with the traditional annual planning in HR, the process orientation, the compliance orientation, and forget about the people in the center. So today is going to be just a relaxed, laid-back discussion between Josh Bersin, who I've been a big fan of since 15 years back and learned a lot from during my HR career. And hopefully also I can share some ideas which I have come across during my 11 years with Agile. So I want to welcome you, Josh. And if you may, I would like to start with interviewing a little bit about you as a person and how you ended up in HR. So I've known you, I came across you when you were still working for Deloitte and sharing a lot of information about HR tech 15 years ago, approximately. And you blew my mind with what you were sharing, your team's research. It was so on top of the modern, the trend thinking all the time, but also practical to a level of sharing models, tips, and tools. How did you end up in HR, and how did it start?
Well, it's a fun. Okay, I am 64. I graduated from college in 1978. I spent 20 years. I worked for IBM for 10 years. I worked for Sybase as a product manager in business development, sales, marketing. Went to work for a startup company in the year 1998 that was building online learning software before the internet was really very big. And then we sold that little company to a bigger company called Digital Think, which was basically an online learning company that was a cloud-based system. Nobody knew what to call it. And then I got laid off in the 2000 recession, right around 9/11. In fact, I was laid off the week before 9/11, if you remember that, and went home. There were no jobs. There was a recession in the Bay Area. And I said, geez, I've learned an awful lot about a technology-based training. You know, I've always wanted to be an industry analyst. Maybe I'll sit around the house and try to write a research report on technology-based training. And I managed to get somebody to help me pay for it. And that became a career for me as an analyst in training initially. And as I started to do more of it and understand the issues of organizing training and the use of technology, people kept saying to me, well, you know, training is part of HR. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with HR. I don't even know what HR is. But what happened, of course, is people started to say, well, what do you know about leadership development? And leadership development is related to succession management. Succession management is related to competency models. And so what I did is over the next 10 years before Deloitte is built this research business studying all these adjacent topics in HR, but always as an analyst. And that's where I got to where I am. Then we sold that company. It was called Bersin and Associates. We sold it to Deloitte in 2012. I spent 6.5 years at Deloitte running what was called Bersin by Deloitte for a while, and then left in 2018. So that's how I got here.
And here you are. Now you
have actually never done HR, you guys. I've actually never been in your jobs, but I feel like I totally am part of the community and really have learned a lot in the process.
You're bringing so much value to the community and are definitely a part of the community, and you've started a community of your own. So can you share a little bit of what you're doing today? Yeah,
the Josh Bersin Academy, sure. So when I left Deloitte, I mean, one of the things that used to come up all the time when I would go visit with companies is they would say, well, first of all, they would say, how do other companies do this? And how do other companies do that? And so we built all these case studies and gave all sorts of these connections. And then they would say, can you teach us a course on this? Can you teach us a course on that? And what I would say is, I'm really not a teacher. I'm really an analyst. And I remember the CHRO of Lockheed Martin once had an argument with me, and she said, no, you don't realize you're actually a teacher. Um, and you're teaching us a lot of stuff. So I kind of let that sit and I just kind of left it aside. And while I was at Deloitte during those years, I kept thinking, we really should have training in our offering. And nobody at Deloitte was interested in that because Deloitte was charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for custom training, and it was a big consulting opportunity for them. So anyway, when I left Deloitte, I was scratching my head. Riina and I talked in the very early days, and I thought, is there a way to build a, cons academy in a sense of HR? So I was originally going to sit down basically in my study and videotape a bunch of stuff and throw it out there. And I realized that's not going to really be very scalable. So I ended up building this academy of professional development. We don't focus on Agile the way Riina does, but we've realized is there's just a massive need for education on many, many, many new topics year after year. Obviously, this year it's been about the pandemic and public health and working at home and psychological safety and all that. So we're building essentially content, and we don't charge much at all. I mean, we're charging almost nothing. It's $250 a year for all the content, all the courses, all the programs, everything. And it's my way of trying to reach more people. And one of the things I've learned, which I kind of knew, but now I'm really learning, is that this is as much a community as it is a academy of courses. So, we're online, we're doing conference calls all the time, just like this, and it's been wonderful. So that's kind of what I've been up to. And Riina is one of our faculty members, and she contributes to the community and participates in it. So she is directly involved, and she can see what it's like.
It's a brilliant, brilliant offering. So very broad offering to HR professionals. And I can see a lot of sharing going on in that community as well, which is fantastic because I think it's time for HR to upskill itself. We can't continue working with 10-year, 20-year-old products and thinking. It is really time. And that is one of our conversation today as well. My background is in HR. I've studied management and organizational theory. I'm actually a chemist, but I wasn't quite a good chemist, so I tried to find something else to study. And it blew my mind learning organizations. Stephen Senji, when I was younger and started working in HR. I did my corporate ladder for 10 years to realize I can't work this way. I do not believe in how HR is set up. I don't believe that we're running processes that are valuable. I was working quite a lot with the frontline managers and employees to realize that what we're delivering out to them isn't good products. They don't like it. They think it's clunky. It is mostly administrative. It is kind of focusing on the compliance. So I started looking for alternatives. And I started thinking about how could organizations be more organic, more adaptive, learning from the biology and chemistry I've learned. I know a lot about how nature works, and started thinking about how can we learn from that? What can organizations look like in the future? I also saw a lot of really amazing people that couldn't use their potential because there were bottlenecks such as managers or steering groups or waiting for answers, and they couldn't use what they were there to do. So then I came across Agile. I came across something called the Scrum Guide, and if you haven't read that, please do. It kind of described what I was looking for. It gave me a language about how organizations, teams, the leadership and self-organization should be set up. That's where I jumped off my corporate career and started my own consultancy, wanting to bring Agile into management and HR. And I'm on that path still. I'm still learning. And while I'm learning, I'm also training other people. I am consulting and helping organizations, executives, teams, and HR people try to redefine in how we do work, how our organizations set up. And that's my core interest. And really glad to have you here, Josh. And I couldn't be more honored to be able to share this kind of 10-year path just with you and just today. and with the book coming
Well,
out.
you
So
know, I'm
thank
an
you.
engineer. The fact that you're a chemist, I didn't know that, Rena. I think there's something about having that science background that makes us a little more maybe ability to deal with all these new ideas.
I think so, and I'm pretty nerdy, so I want to know the facts and data and evidence. I know that you like the people analytics part as well, so it is an inherent thing in everything I do, is that I want to try to figure out how it works and why it works that way. So we've got three themes that we haven't prepared very much. We're just going to talk about them, as I said, and one of the themes are the future of the HR operating models. So
Hmm.
what will HR look like in the future? What do you see? And we might have a couple of slides to show about that, and then discussing that. The second theme would be about upskilling HR. So
Hmm.
what kind of areas do we see that we must start upskilling the people operations and people professionals in? And the third, if we can get all the way there, is the product management and product ownership in HR, starting to see our services as products, which are updated and managed as products. So there is, of course, design and development of them as products, but also maintenance and even retirement of some products. So getting rid of what is in our portfolio, so we are not keeping up everything which might be already old-fashioned or not bringing the value. So those are our themes today. And I would very much like to jump into one theme, which is the operating model. What would be your kind of crystallization of what's going on with HR teams? You work with very large organizations, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk about those first.
There's a history to HR operating models, and first of all, you know, if I go back to the Dave Ulrich stuff, there was this idea that HR was a service center and that we provide services, which we still do. I mean, that never goes away. But we also create design and creative, innovative solutions. And I think the ultimate issue with the operating model is balancing the creativity and the new design, the new offerings with the ongoing services that need to be provided. Because you don't get to do one or the other, you have to do both. And what happens in most companies is when you're small, you got some employees, you got some HR people, you kind of talk to each other, you do stuff, it's all fine. And then the company grows and grows and grows and grows. You say, oh, well, let's get a specialist group to do this. Let's get a special group to do recruiting. We'll get a group to do DEI. We'll get a group to do training. We'll get a group to do comp. We'll get a group to do onboarding.
Yeah.
And these little groups grow, and then they kind of become a lot of them, and they become uncoordinated. And you reach this stage where there's what I call the anarchy state, where there's a lot of great things going on in the company, but they're not coordinated with each other. So the company says we need to do an HR transformation. And we're going to centralize, harmonize, standardize all these things. And by the way, the number of things you do in HR is constantly changing. This year it's safe workplace, well-being, mental human resilience, public health. Next year it'll be something else. I don't know what it is. So what we have to do is create an operating model so that we can reflect the fact that there are some incredibly urgent ongoing services that have to be provided, which you might call DevOps, you know, in the software world, or in a software company, with constant creativity of offerings or products which are changing. Like the onboarding program in a company is never over. I mean, it might be, you know, it may be designed well in the beginning, but as the company changes and there's new business areas and new roles, it's always changing. So that's really the essence of the problem. I'll give you a funny example. We have a client right now that has 350,000 employees and they have 7,000 HR people. It's a 35-to-1 ratio. They have 3 times too many HR people. And, you know, we dug around, we figured out what was going on. The reason they have so many HR people is they have 100 different business units, each of which are in different countries. And each business unit has its own HR team doing all sorts of stuff that I'm sure is absolutely badly needed, but there's no common sharing. So the operating model of HR is mimicking the operating model of the company. Well, this company is really suffering right now. They can't hire well. They have no common language for skills. They don't they don't work well in business units. So they're basically saying now we need to clean up this HR thing. And so that's actually not uncommon. I just got off a call right before this with IBM on a bunch of other companies, Nokia and a few others, talking about the same problem. So, and I think operating models are not a one and done thing. When I was at Deloitte, we used to sell these HR transformation projects, and we would go to a big company and they would say, okay, we're implementing Workday, so we need an HR transformation. There'd be like 2 years and $20 million later. Okay, we're done. Here's the keys. We're giving you the keys to the car. We're leaving. It doesn't work like that.
I agree. So this is also
This
what
is your car. You need to keep it up to date. You got to keep putting air in the tires and rotate the tires and put gas in it. So this is part of our job, is always, working on it to make it better. But I think this fundamental issue of design and creativity and development of new things with operating management, getting net promoter scores, looking at data of the current things is really the balance. It isn't just set up some COEs, set up some business partners, and everybody's happy.
I really, I'm hearing what you're saying, and massive organizations that you work with. I work with a little bit smaller organizations, usually between 50,000 and down to a couple of thousand. And I see the similar kind of things there. So first of all, HR is maybe even lacking an operating model. If they do have one, it's the Ulrich model, which they are all trying to pursue. Now realizing that it doesn't work, it's siloing, and even Ulrich is saying that he's updating the model and talking about new operating model in HR.
I know somebody wants a picture. I do have a picture. It's very high level, but it might be a good thing to think about if you guys want to look at it.
Can you put that up? While you're doing that, I'm kind of talking. I'm seeing also that HR teams have way too many things on their plates. So they are not that good at prioritizing, and they are saying yes because the businesses are asking everything from them at the same time. So there is a lack of prioritization capabilities, which leads to the HR doing 100 things at the same time, not really delivering up value to the business. And I can see that as a challenge. And that's why many HR teams are currently looking for new ways of working. How can we reorganize this so that we're not having that many handovers, so that we are not one point of contact delivering something to a project manager who then tries to integrate that and then deliver that to the organization? How can we work together better? And I'm seeing this happen in the bigger organizations and in the smaller as well. Okay, you've got a nice picture here.
Okay, so this is, yeah, it's a schematic, so it's not like you could pick it up and use it, but it gets the ideas across. On the left is the employees, and of course there's contractors and part-time workers. Then in the dark blue are the embedded HR roles. Depending on the size of the company and your strategic issues, it could be one business partner role, but there are companies that have talent acquisition business partners allocated to different business areas and recruiting. Lots of companies have learning business partners allocated, focused on skills development in different areas, like in sales or major customer service groups.
So they got the consultants basically very close to the...
yeah, they're basically people that take the expertise of the COE and apply it to that company, that part of the company. And the other one that I thought was interesting is analytics. One of the people analytics groups I met with in Australia actually has business partners assigned to business areas, so they know the data issues and the data needs of that business area in great detail, and they can give them all sorts of proactive recommendations. The next layer is the self-service environment, huge area of growth and innovation in HR. So if you don't have that, then the business partners end up doing a ton of stuff like that for people. The next layer is what I call, and you may have a different model for this in your Agile stuff, but on the top, there's service groups, service centers that handle incoming issues on general HR services, retirement, mobility, employee relations.
That have certain skills and
Right.
spend their time on certain kind of questions.
Right. Like if there's a harassment claim, there's no reason the business partner has to get out the book and read all the laws about harassment. That should go to an employee service center that knows what to do about
Correct.
that. In fact, at one of the companies I talked to, they have an entire solutions center focused on low performing people. We know, for example, in this particular company, there's a lot of people that are at stages of their career where they're not transforming themselves. So we want to give them, a set of services. In fact, at Cisco, I was on the phone with the CHRO at Cisco. They've organized the entire HR function around communities, not around functional organizations.
What about the back end of here?
So then the back end, what I'm trying to show here is basically, and this is where your expertise is so badly needed. Instead of just having COEs that are entirely dedicated in owning one thing, there needs to be some amount of cross-functional agility for people to work on projects outside of their COE. And so what I'm just trying to show here is that the best HR functions have essentially resource management, where somebody who's in a COE can work on another project also that may cross domains, because all of these domains are connected. The blue boxes on the far right are not really standalone islands anymore.
I do agree with this. It's a model that you can start seeing in organizations that start having these separate HR functions, services, and then maybe a layer of business partners, etc. For example, you're talking about the squad model. So having squads of cross-functional HR people that have talent and skills across the different HR areas. And when there is something that needs to be done, developed, they are then pulled together from that pool, created squads or agile teams that then focus on delivering that end to end, all the way to the users and handing over that to the HR services later on when it's developed and validated. Also helping the business partners to understand how it's adopted and supporting that first adoption release when it's released to the organization. So this is what we're seeing a lot of HR teams do currently. And it's very exciting, since now finally we can realize that actually the HR, I think that the HR skills areas are not that rocket science. So if you are good at talent acquisition, you're quite quickly picking up on performance management, or you're quite quickly picking up on, for example, management development, especially in the OD, L&D kind of area. Then if we're talking about legal matters, that might be needing a more in-depth, higher risk mitigation possibilities. The other thing what we are seeing is to understand is in the smaller teams, in smaller HR teams, we're starting to see transparency across the whole HR team. So that on the right-hand side, Kanban for HR teams, where they are leading everything they do in HR on a transparent Kanban, seeing what sits in their backlog, what they are working with in the doing, what they will do next, and what is done. This way, showing to the organization or the unit, if this is in a smaller scale, what's going on in HR. There's a lot of our customers or users that have no idea what HR is doing. So this is bringing transparency. Then we see, for example, I think this on the right is a bit what you're saying with your fantastic picture as well, is that we've got the employee experience as a product where we have some continuous listening, following up what needs to be fixed or where the biggest value is if we develop something new. And then exactly as you showed, people from different HR domains and even outside HR are collaborating to get something delivered, say an onboarding program. Why would that be only HR that would develop that? We need IT on that. We need facilities on that. We might need health and safety on that as well. So we start seeing even cross-functional teams with people outside HR. And then we also see, if we look at how one person HR companies, just one HR person, what the operating model can be there. You can't go in and implement service centers and business partners there, right? So we might see these one person HR people actually starting to interact with the organization and asking for volunteers to join in on people projects, join in on delivering and developing reward practices or leadership practices to the organization. So you actually involve the people, the managers, the leaders themselves in delivering products to themselves. So these are just a couple of models that I am seeing across a bit smaller organizations. Just wanted to, what are you seeing when I share those, Josh?
Well, no, I think you're getting into the sort of the grassroots of how the teams function. Um, I mean, I've visited some HR departments that have Kanban boards and they have project management screens and so forth like that. Honestly, it's pretty rare though. Usually there's a bunch of PowerPoint slides and maybe a SharePoint portal and a lot of conference calls and meetings about projects, and people are stepping through them step by step. So, I wish we could all be more transparent and tools oriented like software engineers, but my gut is that that's maybe 10 or 15% of the companies, and that 80% of us are still
Yeah.
in meetings, PowerPoint, conference calls. And I'll tell you a funny story. One of the companies we've been working with is a pharmaceutical company, so they're obviously going through a lot. And they said the governance process for HR is a series of committees. So we have a standing committee that meets every 2 weeks in different business areas. Well, because the committees meet every 2 weeks and there's 3 or 4 committees, and it takes a while to get on the committee's agenda, every time you want to roll something out, it takes about 2 or 3 months to get everybody to approve. So what's agile about that? So this woman I was talking to said, thank God we had the pandemic, we shut down all the committees. So now we can sort of make decisions. So some of the power of the model is liberating yourself from all of the stakeholder analysis. Because I don't know, Riina, here's a question for you. The reason everybody goes through all that stakeholder analysis is because they want to make sure people buy in before they roll it out. But if we roll it out in iterations, we don't need to do so much because we're going to keep changing it, and we're co-designing it, right?
Yeah.
So that's a huge philosophical issue that I don't think HR people always understand.
It's a massive mindset shift. We're just now helping one of the organizations we work with set up an experimentation portfolio. So talking about, right, you don't have to go to a steering group and have your scope, time, and cost fixed on everything and massive implementations. Why don't we start running an experimentation portfolio on the side? So trying things out small scale, seeing what works, and then starting to realize what truly brings value. Quite often, there are HR teams that believe they know what is needed, but once they take it through some design thinking, some validation, some testing with real clients, users, managers, they will tell you what they need. And usually that's just 20% of what you think they need, right? They just need the essentials to help them do a great job. And we're just overthinking it so often. So running the small scale experimentation on the side is something that I'm lacking in quite many HR teams, so that they, with small risk, could figure out what needs.
Part of this, Riina, I'd love to get your thoughts on is developing the solution with a particular business area so they're part of the design, as opposed to sitting in corporate trying to design something that's going to work for everybody, which is very, very hard to do.
Yeah.
And then, you get sort of quick iterative design. I mean, I've seen companies do this and it works so much better.
It does. The only thing is tricky for HR people to understand who are going to move this way is that you might need 3 different alternatives of performance management. You might need some hacking where you do recruitment interviews in 5 different ways because they work better this way to sales and this way to manufacturing. So we need to start being much more flexible in our thoughts with that. Should we take a couple of questions? The winning question is, which metrics do you see for an agile HR setup? NPS, health checks, etc. So if you go with the metrics of the HR operations first, what would you use?
Well, I mean, the real success of HR is, are the employees happy? Is the retention rate, is the productivity high? Is the revenue, revenue per employee? I mean, this sounds stupid, but one sign of a healthy company is revenue per employee is high. I hate to say it, but that is a very, very big way of figuring out if the company is operating well. But there's many, many layers beneath that. When you get, what I used to do, we get a lot of calls from companies that say, how do I get my business leaders to buy off on this big new grandiose HR thing we're building? And what I usually say to them is, well, they're not going to care what it is. They're going to care about what their business problems are. So start with that.
Exactly.
And so I think the best way to measure HR are the programs that you're delivering contributing to the strategic business goals or strategies or initiatives of the company? And if so, chances are people know that. And if not, you kind of got to scratch your head and say, is this a compliance thing we're doing? Or have we not maybe aligned it well with the business leaders so they understand what it is? And then, of course, I was just on the phone with Diane Gerson from IBM. They do net promoter scores of HR offerings where people can rate up or down whether they would recommend this particular program. In learning, there's been the Kirkpatrick method and millions of ways to get. I think the simplest way to sort of measure an HR program is, would you recommend this to somebody else in the company or not?
Yeah, I agree. There's
and if
a lot
not, then maybe it's not that good.
I like the so what question, actually. So a lot of HR people kind of take it to the level of saying, yes, this will help us with our talent acquisition, and we're going to be so much faster with filling positions. But the question is, so what? What does that mean, as in euros or dollars, as in revenue, as in minimizing risk? Can you actually put a number on that? And we have so massive business cases sometimes which we are unable to quantify. I had a person in the training who said to me that she can save, she can try to have the HR service center do 8 tickets instead of 6 tickets an hour. And then she said the performance is going up, and that was her metric. And I said, why don't we calculate the business case for that? And it ended up having a return of investment like 560% or something. So it was a massive business case. Just putting 100 euros in would give you 560 times the euros back. So it was a clear investment decision, not even a cost decision. But we're not that good at making this translation towards the business metrics. So I think what we're looking at here is we need to learn how to speak the business language, and maybe even connect our goals to the business goals, as you said, Josh. Then, of course, if we're looking at our services and products, we should have, on a lower level, we should have NPS, and are people happy with that? One thing from an agile perspective is improvement. So we want to see continuous improvement in what we are doing. So we want to see a trend which is going upwards, becoming better or increasing in our metrics. And if you're not seeing that, there is not the agile continuous improvement going on. So I would say that would be something that would add. Here's a question that I'd like to kind of point out. What's the difference between IT agile transformation and HR agile transformation? Well, not much. It's a change, in my opinion. It is a change where people's mindset will need to start developing towards understanding a whole new way of working. It's a new way of working, so we need to start experimenting with incremental value delivery, with learning together, with cross-functional teams, not having our own silo or only our own targets to work on. It is needing a whole new structure of how we manage things. So I don't see the transformation being different. What we are using the transformation for is, of course, different. How do we need to upskill ourselves? Just shoot.
Well, I think the skilling thing, well, let's just accept the fact that this is a complicated profession. Okay. So you're sitting in a role or a department or a group or a profession that is very, very complex. There's business practices and everything from sourcing and recruiting and employment branding to performance management, leadership development, training, coaching, blah, 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 blah. then there's tech, then there's data, then there's business culture issues, then there's the economy, right? And then there's of course the individual cultural issues in your company, which have to do with personalities and the history of your company. So if you want to be a really successful HR person, you need to kind of accept the fact that you're going to be learning your entire career, which is why it's so great. Um,
Yes.
now, how do you do that? I think it's basically the old, if you've seen the T-shaped model, which is whatever your current job is, you get as deep as you can in that. And that could be anything from being a business partner or being a recruiter or being an L&D professional or whatever. And then you look at the adjacencies, and I think you have to be curious about the adjacent areas of HR because they touch you all the time. I think one of the things that's changed a lot in the last maybe decade or less is all of the HR practices are connected. Recruiting touches diversity, diversity touches pay, pay touches performance management touches culture. So you can't just say, well, this is my area. I'm not really aware of what those guys are doing. You actually kind of do need to know what they're doing and have a healthy respect for it. And so I think, and just like as an engineer, when I was an engineer, if you only know one thing, you're usually going to have a reasonably good job for a while until that thing changes or gets automated.
Yes.
I mean, I was on the phone. Here's a perfect example. I was on the phone with the head of recruiting for a pharmaceutical company last week. And she said, so much has changed in genetics that we cannot look for people by job anymore because the jobs we are building do not exist. We need to look for people based on their science experience and their project experience.
That's a
Because
perfect example.
because this stuff is all new. And basically the same thing's happening in HR.
Yeah.
So so I think now there's no shortage of places to learn. You can go to Riina, you can go to me, you can read books, there's webinars, there's events, there's conferences. I mean, my experience, what I've found is that, every time I have an opportunity to learn something, go to a conference, take a course or whatever, I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, do I really have time for this? And I realized later, boy, am I glad I did that because it gave me some perspective I really needed. So I think it's a combination of respecting the breadth and history. But another thing that I would add is history. I have really learned a lot about it because I wasn't in HR and I didn't know anything about it when I joined. The only way I could learn about it was by reading about the history of things. Everything you do in HR has a history. It's there because somebody dreamed it up under some conditions that may or may not apply. Like I'm in the middle of writing a big article on performance management, which, is obviously a gigantic topic. And I found out, the roots of many of the performance management practices go back to slavery. There's books on slavery in the 1800s in the United States where they actually show how they allocated goals to people picking cotton in the United States. And it is a perfect model of a performance management process. Perfect. It's almost like somebody copied it and put it into, 200 years later.
Wow.
So I think having a little bit of interest in the history of this stuff and why are we doing it this way and who came up with this idea and under what conditions will also make you a better HR professional.
Touching upon that, we've looked into the organizational change quite a lot in with our clients in our trainings, and quite few people actually know about Taylorism. So how Frederick Winslow Taylor is the background to why our organizations look like they do, because he optimized how factories were working and set up a certain structure with optimizing processes.
Yeah, but 50 years before him were the slave owners, believe it or not.
Yeah. So what we're looking at, I mean, the line management structure in, for example, in HR, we take line managers for granted, but are those really needed anymore? Do we need the line management structure anymore? I was working with a transformation of a business unit where the leader wanted us to start onboarding people into self-organizing teams. And when they did, they had product owners and scrum masters in the teams, and they didn't need the managers anymore. But HR was saying, no, you need to have a manager because our HRIS system requires a manager to approve all these operating administrative tasks. And I was tearing my hair off and said, do you understand? This digital unit is your spearhead unit. We're going towards agile operating models. We don't have line manager roles anymore. Yeah, but you can't do that organizational change because we need a line manager. So what we did was find a workaround to that. We added one person to be everybody's line manager, and he just basically sat there and clicked in one of the HR systems, approve, approve, approve on the
Well, you know, I think
processes.
the most fundamental reason why people need these ideas of Agile is because the industrial hierarchy is coming to an end. In some companies it's over, in some companies it's starting to come to an end. So the idea of what a manager does is very different. Managers haven't gone away, but they don't have the same role. They're not sort of the boss, and they don't tell people what to do all the time. It was interesting if you read, you know, there was a whole bunch of historical articles about Tony Hsieh, who died last week, and about holacracy at Zappos. If you remember, if you're a history of this stuff, he made a big deal at Zappos about getting rid of managers. And actually it was a big flop.
Yeah.
Nobody's written about it, but I visited them. It didn't work at all. So managers are still needed, but they're very different. They have different roles. They're much more coaches. Somebody mentioned that, gardeners. I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, they're leading the system more than leading the work. They're
Yeah,
trying
in fact, the one line I just remember on managers was from W.L. Gore. The woman there who runs L&D said to me once, managers manage projects, people manage themselves. And I thought that was sort of a good way to think about it is, you know, we don't need a manager to tell us what to do all day, but we would like a manager to help us make sure we're doing the right things and we're working on the right projects and spending our time in the right places. So anyway, that's a big part of Agile too.
It is, and I'm not saying absolutely, please don't misunderstand me that I meant that managers aren't needed. The traditional line management structure is not needed in agile organizations anymore. So that's changing and rapidly right now. But it kind of feels like, if we go back to operating models, that quite a lot of organizations are trying to kind of keep the structure that they have, the line management structure and the decision-making structure and the power structure and the mandates and the planning, and then add agile on top of that. So trying to kind of, and mixing these two isn't such a good idea. It's going to always, it's like oil and water. They're always going to have tensions in between them and not going to mix very well. So finding a hybrid model, of course, is important, but not trying to keep up. Let me give you an example. I have agile teams who say, we are agile. We have a product owner. We have Scrum Master. We're working in increments. But still, we have steering groups that make decisions for us. So it takes away what you said, the possibility to adapt and react and just incremental development. It's super
yeah, there's the book that got me interested in Agile, it's a little bit old, but I'm a reader, is The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks, if you've ever read it. It's basically about IBM, and I worked at IBM during the time, and it's not a very long book. It's worth reading, and I think it's free. You can get it on the internet. And what he basically talks about is how eventually it reached a point at IBM in Santa Teresa where as they added more people to a project, it got slower and slower and slower, and no work got done at all. None. Zero. There was a zero return on adding more people. And so he basically did what Riina's teaching you guys how to do. He broke everybody into small groups. He has a very particular way of organizing the groups. He looked about, his analogy is that an agile team is like an operating room where there's a surgeon and there's a nurse and there's an anesthesiologist, and they all have very special roles and they work together as a small group. But it's worth reading to remind yourself of the fact that you can't do both. You have to kind of move in that direction and let go of some of the old stuff.
I just have a team that in 9 months, they've changed their whole talent acquisition team of 35, 40 people from traditional waterfall line organization, hierarchy to self-organizing teams that are working together. And they said they would never have believed that could happen in such a quick time. But it's because if they all understand these two different ways of working and they can choose between them, and it just makes sense working in a new way, people are quite smart. They will choose this new way of working if it makes sense, it creates more value, and they are allowed to. So I think it's magic what can happen, and quite quickly, if people are allowed to work in a way which brings value the best. Product ownership, which I know you are excited about as well. So how do we in HR not stand as process owners that are compliant, looking at compliance, but starting to own products instead? Thinking about the commercial aspects and kind of consumerism with our services as well. Would you mind sharing some ideas on that?
Yeah, I've been a product manager a couple times, and the difference between, I think, a project manager or product or offering manager and a process owner is you think about the users as customers, not people who have to use the process. I mean, I'll never forget when I was at Sybase, we had somebody who went out and bought Siebel and basically forced us to use it. And we went through weeks and weeks and weeks of training, and we never understood why we were using it or what the value was to us. And it basically was a flop. The whole project was a massive, massive failure. If they had thought about it as a product and said, hey, here's something that will help you become a better salesperson, and we want to get your feedback and tell us what you like and what you don't like, we probably would have been fine. But they designed it in a vacuum and rolled it out and pushed it on us, and it failed. So a product manager is a listener, is constantly iterating, is looking at feedback from customers. They think about users as customers. They try to make the product so easy to use and so useful that you don't have to train people how to use it, which is not as easy as it sounds. And they are product managers. It's a very hard job. Product managers have to understand the role of different technologies, design. They have to understand how to work with IT and that software people. So those are the skills I think that are really badly needed to roll out great HR programs now.
I so agree with you. We're actually now launching a HR product ownership training, but on that point, I've been training product owners on the tech side and the business side now for a couple of years. And what's common with them is that they realize that doing that stakeholder management and having all those stakeholders that want something out of your product, and you need to start making decisions about which features are most important. But you need to have data and evidence to show that to the stakeholders and say, I know you're asking about A, but that is only important for, say, 50% of the people. We've got lined up features that are more important, more valuable, and if we launch them, they will bring much more value. So it starts to be about prioritization, about what is important, and being able to have that data and evidence to have these difficult discussions, and then make decisions, truly make decisions of the products and stand behind those decisions. So I think that's also something which HR people would have immense benefit from, to understand what's the life cycle of products. How do I make decisions about what to update and what not to update? When do we retire a product? I mean, how many of us are still hanging on to the employee survey, one annual employee survey, or biannual, even worse? What benefit does that tell us when organizations have changed and the teams have changed when the results come out? So, I mean, we're holding on to old products and services that might not even bring the value anymore, but just because somebody has a KPI of employee survey, ratings, that still is there. So what value does that bring? So a product owner is really good at defining what is needed, who will need that, what are the features and the kind of acceptance criteria for what we are releasing, and how can we also cut away a lot of waste from what we're doing. I think that's something in HR. We want to be so perfect, and we want to deliver maybe over delivery is something that we do quite often as well. We are on the minute, Josh. I'm just going to, I know that you are going to need to go soon. What is your timeline, by the way? It's
for today.
Yeah.
I think I need to jump off. Yeah, I'm actually supposed to be in another call at 10, so I probably need to jump off in a minute.
I'm going to stay on for another 15, but I want to make sure that we have a possibility to thank you. So please write something in the chat, everybody, to thank
Thank
Josh,
you, everybody.
and wish you a fantastic Christmas
Thank you for
time.
inviting me, Riina. And you join us in the academy or just contact me online, and love to talk to any of you. And thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Josh.
Bye,
and thanks for participating in the book as well. Been lovely to work with you.